All right, Tim. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day, and glad to hear that family and everybody's doing well amidst the chaos in our current climate and culture here. And yeah, as always, I really do like to thank our guests for coming on and setting time aside from their busy lives, because it's a commitment. And so I do want to just first of all thank you for coming on and agreeing to spend the next couple minutes with me here. So before we get into just a couple of questions that we like to ask on the podcast here is just for people that know absolutely nothing about you. Could you share just a little bit of your background and how? Yeah, let's kind of go in where you came from, your educational background, and how you ultimately landed in this high performance world. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I'm a sports scientist, and I work across kind of rehab and strength and conditioning fields. If you, I was talking to my son about this the other day. We have a very big competition here called the South competition that's played every year, and it's the most intense competition. It's a fierce competition, and if you live in the north, you want your team to win. If you live in the south, you want your team to win. It's a very fierce competition, and my son was talking to me about it, and he was talking about his first memories of sitting down with his dad and watching the State of Origin. It made me think about my first memories of the State of Origin, and some of my really early memories of State of Origin were watching the game live and doing stats, taking stats.
Oh wow.
We have runs with the ball and tackles, and so I had the team sheets, and I was coding live real time when I was about I think I would have been somewhere around 12 years old, something like that. So, it's funny when I'd kind of forgotten that moment, but there's lots of little moments in your life that probably lead you to this point, and that's probably one of them. And even my son said when we were talking about it, he said, "Oh, look, you were destined to be a sports scientist. Like you, right from an early age, you were doing it."
Yes.
And I'd forgotten all about it. But maybe maybe that was part of it. I was around sport my whole life, and my father trained he trained athletes, he trained runners, he trained footballers. So I learned a lot about training from him, probably more than I ever learned from anything at university, to be honest, and any book that I picked up. So I think there was lots of little things that kind of guided me towards that, and then here I am now, doing what I do and enjoying it, for the most part, enjoying it.
Very cool. Very cool. I love the like personal background, a little personal connection to that because I find it ironic as well because I was in and out of a lot of chiropractors' office myself with scoliosis as a child, and so my family can look back on it and as well and go, well, of course you would become a chiropractor. So I can definitely relate to a similar destiny, so to speak.
Yeah,
A lot of good
you heard a
chiropractors
lot.
and a lot of not so good ones, but either way, nonetheless.
You
Um,
hear a lot of that. Why did you become a physical therapist?
right.
Or because I was an elite athlete and I had a serious career-ending injury,
Yep.
and I wanted to do something about. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Well, why did you become a strength and conditioning coach? Well, I really loved training. I really loved fitness, and I wanted to dig into it as much as I could. And then the next thing, I was coaching teams, or
Right.
yeah. So there's a lot of that kind of
Yeah, you can.
synergy there.
I'm sure with all the people that you've met and when they introduce themselves to you at the courses that you teach, that you get to notice some of the patterns of like how you can recognize people ultimately landing in their jobs or their roles
Yeah,
quite
yeah,
frequently.
absolutely,
Yep. Yep.
absolutely.
So that's a good segue into kind of the education realm and how you have a vast knowledge base in regards to this topic of load management. But what really led you down the path of, yeah, I really want to get into education? You've got a dual PhD, which is fantastic and impressive. But what kind of, instead of, possibly going the clinician route of like treating, or possibly, physical therapy, physiotherapy? What made you want to work with athletes in this very different, very unique capacity like you've established with this load management phenomenon?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole heap to unpack here. So,
Cool.
firstly, you mentioned the two PhDs. All that tells you is that I'm a glutton for punishment. There's no need to do two PhDs, and in a lot of fields, there's no need to do one. Um, in terms of load management, how did I it's a really interesting area because I've been training athletes for over 20 years, researching it for over 20 years. And you would think, okay, by now, Tim knows everything there is to know about load management. Um, but what I can tell you is the more I dig into it, the more I learn, the less I feel I know.
Mm.
And it's kind of, you could, on the one hand, it can be frustrating. Geez, why don't I know that? I've been doing this stuff for 20, 25 years. But on the other hand, you kind of shrug and you go, okay, well, it's a good thing because I can get up tomorrow morning and I can learn something new. And every day I'm going to be learning something new until the day I don't get up. And so that's a good way to look at it. In terms of um, my main job is working with athletes. It's day in, day out. I'm either with an athlete or with a coach, and we're talking about how we're going to get better. What are we going to do to get better? And um, it just the people I meet along the way. If we meet someone in rehab, um, a lot of the time, not all the time, a lot of the time, when an athlete comes back into rehab, oh, he trained too hard. He got broken because he trained too hard. And then at the other end, the strength and conditioning coach is saying, no, he didn't train hard enough. Now, they're probably both right and they're probably both wrong. Somewhere in the middle is probably going to be your right answer. But it just occurred to me that there's a lot of people out there who are training athletes who want better information about it. They want to move away from just going, try this and see how you feel. They want some evidence around it, and they
Right.
want to know what best practice is. And part of that involves research. Part of it involves your clinical experience, and part of it involves your athlete expectations. So you need to kind of join up that, embrace the uncertainty about what you don't know, and what we don't know as a group of people. There's a lot we don't know about load management, um, and try and use an evidence-based approach to training your athlete out of pain, training your athlete back from injury, getting them back to what they want to do as part of their sport, or what they need to do as part of their sport. So that's kind of how I ended up, doing a lot of the courses. Is I just felt there's a lot of research information that a lot of people don't read papers. Um, why don't I put it together in a way that is user friendly, that has a lot of practical tips in there, so that when they go back to their practice, whatever that practice is on Monday, they've got something they can use. They've got some extra tools in the toolkit.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely. I previously attended your class, and one thing, I mean, several things I took away from your course, but the main thing that I took away was the communication between the different professions. So I remember, not to spoil anything from your class, but when you sat us together and you said, okay, strength coach, okay, a coach or a manager of a team, you're involved, and now the three of you, the medical, the health, and the coaching, you three need to sit together and communicate. And boy, it was so challenging to communicate my perspective over to the two other providers. I mean, I can connect, the two other professionals, but I can communicate to a strength coach, and I feel like I could connect quite well. But I have definitely found myself, whenever I speak to coaches, on what I know and what I'm seeing, I definitely struggled with that in clinical practice. So your class was very, very, um, very, it just touched home with me. And I know I was not alone. I know there were a lot of medical providers in the class that took that away with them.
Well, one of the really cool things about the course we did in Chicago was that we had a rowing coach. I don't know
That's
if you
right.
remember, we had a
Yeah.
rowing
Yeah.
coach from I want to say Notre Dame,
It was Notre Dame.
and
That's right.
and so that was unique in itself to have an actual sports coach. But when we split them up in the groups, he that was a random allocation. He ended up in the early stage rehab group,
That's right.
and he led that group. I mean, that was what was so cool about it.
That's
And
fascinating. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, and there was a lot of things, and it's kind of funny how no two workshops are alike. That was one of the first times that I juggled around a few things, because normally I would allocate a coach to that end stage,
Right.
and the fact that he ended up in the early stage rehab group was great because he could see it from a different perspective.
Absolutely.
But he came up with some really good early stage rehab. Um,
Yeah. I remember some of the questions that he first started asking were he was almost thinking out loud as he was asking them, because he had not been in that environment before, but he was willing to work through it. And that's why I think a lot of people and a lot of participants in the group could see that he was struggling outside of a different stage that he was comfortable with or familiar with. And we thought, oh shoot, when I'm in a different stage, I'm definitely, I'm definitely uncomfortable as well. I'm good in my stage. I feel really comfortable and confident with what I know in my stage. But if I were to ever step out of this, that would be uncomfortable for sure. So yeah, I have to commend you on the structure of the course. I took away a lot of that, and in fact, I know I mentioned it already, but the communication side was certainly something that I'm not gonna ruin the class. I'm not gonna give any spoilers.
no
But
problem.
you should certainly, if you're interested in Tim's work, and I know a lot of people are, I highly recommend you go to Tim's website and find, one of a class or a course that he teaches in your area. Probably starting next year, right? You're going to be out in 2021, hopefully.
Yeah, look, when we do courses all the time, but when I come to the States next, it'll likely be the middle of next year, and we're gonna kick it off with you.
Nice.
I like Chicago, and yeah, I had a great time there last time. So there was literally no decision to make when I go places. Sometimes we make a decision not to go back because of the experience we have. But if we have a great experience, there was actually no second guessing at all. Yep, put it in. That's the first one. So um, hopefully things with COVID calm down. But when we get back to, I think it'd be early July, we're planning for. Um, we're gonna come out with a bang. There'll be new material by then, of course. And one thing touched on there about you know that the coach that you mentioned, you could see he was uncomfortable. And I think part of the course is, yeah, there is a degree of, we're gonna stretch you. We want to try and stretch you a little bit, stretch what you think you know about a particular area, but it's a safe environment too. Like it's not as though you're going to be that uncomfortable that you're going to walk out of there feeling, I never want to go back. I don't want to go back tomorrow. Like it's um, you want to feel stretched to the point where, okay, I'm growing a little bit here. I'm challenging my views on what load management actually is.
Hmm. No, it's fantastic. And yeah, I'm sure we could talk for hours and probably days on end about load management and your work. And so the one thing that I do have to commend you on is not a lot of researchers, at least not the ones that I follow or that I've seen, are as forthcoming with a lot of the papers that they write. And I have to commend you a lot for, like, you give a lot of your research out. And so I have to just say, thank you. I plow through a lot and as much as I can. But really, it's cool if you're not following Tim on social media or not on his email list. He's very generous with his information, and I highly recommend that you take advantage of some of the free resources that he's got out there. But yeah, along the same lines there, you've established this connection between the research world and then into, you know what, I'm going to be the one that goes out and delivers this information in what you said, a user-friendly way, which means starting a business and then possibly bringing some people on board. So what is, I like to ask this question to people that are leaders in their field, and I consider you a leader in your field for sure. What's something that while bringing on a team and starting a business and taking it across the world, across the globe, what's something that you've made a mistake on that you feel comfortable sharing with us that you as a business owner and as a leader have learned from over the past few years of your coursework?
Well, look, I think the biggest mistake probably started a lot earlier than me, than when started the business. In my early career, I committed a lot of time to my work, and we talk about work-life balance. I don't think I had the balance right. Um, and in fact, not to the point where I neglected my family or anything like that, but I just think I put too much emphasis into my work, um, at times at the expense of more important things, being my family. And the reality with sport is there's no goal watch at the end of it. So everyone talks about team first, and whatever it takes, you got to do whatever you can for the team. And yeah, I mean that's true to a point, but after losing a few jobs in sport for no other reason than um, you were liked one day, you're not liked the next. People fall in and out of love with each other, and it's the same with jobs. After losing a few jobs in sport, you realize that one, the team and the organization cope just fine without you. You're not indispensable. And two is, after they've gone for 5 seconds, oh gee, Tim's gone, how are we going to cope with, how are we going to do what we used to do, how are we going to cope? 5 seconds later they go, oh geez, okay, we better get someone in that chair, who's next? They just move on with life, and with or without you, and their thoughts about you, as soon as you're out the door, they stop thinking about you. So um, I think a big lesson for me is just to um, keep keep the more important things in perspective. That what we do is important, but none of it really matters. And I read a book a number of years ago. I think it was the Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus book. And I think one of the early chapters was something along the lines of um, men men build their success complex through work. Women do it through their family. Now, I'm sure it may not be the case. It's probably generalizing, but it also said that it takes you to you get to about 40 years of age, and then you realize that work isn't everything.
Mm.
But I was lucky enough to have a really good family around me. My wife has been very supportive and been great in kind of pulling me back at times and going, I know this is important to you. Okay, keep pushing. Or I know this is important, but now something else requires your attention. Um, so that, I mean, I'd like to say, oh yeah, I've worked it all out and I've got that balance right now. It's a work in progress every day. Um, I've got to catch myself and make sure I don't go lean one way or the other too far.
Right.
So that's probably, it's a little bit of a personal learning story, but that's probably one of the biggest ones that I've learned.
No, I appreciate you sharing that because as entrepreneurs and as small business owners all over the world, the people that listen to this are listening for pearls like that, like, that's a personal, you didn't even say mistake, but that's just something that you've learned from. And I'm absolutely guilty of the balance going heavily in the favor of work. And I remember, my wife is also similar to your wife in a sense that she'll pull me back in the direction. And now it only takes a look, and I know what's following, which is, and I think I told you this, Tim, but we've got 4 kids under the age of 9 at the moment,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
a 2-year-old golden doodle who is actually the most high maintenance of them all. But my wife, she just has to give me a look and say, they're only little ones. And I'm like,
Yeah.
all right, I'll be home for dinner. Or, all right, let's do something this weekend. Let's do something that matters. And so I have to give my wife a lot of credit for the traditions. Like if there's things that are on the calendar, it's because of her, and it's because we do things as a family together. And so some probably listeners to this podcast would even argue that my pendulum goes too far over towards family, and I neglect work and I neglect emails. And I'm certainly learning from that, in a sense that I'm able to then put people in places where they can then respond to my emails, and they can help me with, CEU paperwork and that sort of thing, which it sounds like, just emailing with you and your team. First of all, you guys have a very prompt, very responsive group, and that's incredible to work with. I can't tell you how frustrating it is to work with people. You get everything lined up, everything is agreed upon, and at the 11th hour, something switches, something urgent, and it's like, oh, come on! I thought we all had this
Yeah.
taken
Yeah.
care
Yeah.
of. I've never had an issue with your group. It's fantastic to work with. And one thing that I wanted to mention is does your son still work for you?
Yeah. Yeah. He does. Yeah.
And
I couldn't cope without him.
Yeah, and that is another testament to just, some people say never work with family. Some people say never hire your friends. I've got a family member that works for me currently. It's fantastic, but it's fantastic because I know her heart. She knows my heart. You know your son. He knows you. It works. If you need to call a spade, I found it works tremendously well. And I can compartmentalize things, and I can just say, hey, that wasn't what I was expecting, but you're still coming over for dinner, that sort of thing. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I
Yeah. That's
think
good.
as long as people know that I genuinely care for them and I can challenge them directly, it doesn't matter if they're a family or someone I've hired, outside of family. But I just feel like that's something that I gained confidence from you by hearing that you have hired your son and it works and he does a tremendous job for you and you are able to do the important things that you need to do. But yeah, I appreciate you sharing those sorts of things. And you mentioned a book earlier, and I just wanted to touch on any other books that you would recommend in either your business, what you've learned. Could be finances, it could be personal development, whatever.
Mm.
Give our listeners 1, 2, I don't care, 3 books that you would highly recommend that people read in their spare time while they've finished watching all of everything on Netflix during COVID here. What's something that they could just take some time aside and read and really learn from?
Okay. Well, it depends a little bit on who I'm buying for and who I'm giving the book to. So if I'm giving the book to my dad, then I'll give him a book about probably an autobiography, either an athlete autobiography or a coach's autobiography, something that I mean, there's a book I gave him recently by a coach named Craig Bellamy, and he's probably one of the most successful coaches we have in Australia, and he's got some really I want to let's call them old school values and philosophies, but they're just good principles,
Hmm.
and he reminds me a lot of my dad, and I gave my dad the book and he loved it, and I loved it as well because it was just simple philosophies. If I was if you're interested in learning a lot about a lot of general different things and a simple explanation of a whole heap of different phenomenon we see day to day, I think Malcolm Gladwell is always a good read, and there's one of his books, I can't remember which one. I think it was one of his later books where he talks about leadership, and in there he talks about kind of 3 rules that one, we want to know that the rules that apply to Alex also apply to Tim. The second rule is that the rules that applied yesterday are going to apply today.
Hmm.
The third rule is if the rules change, that it's communicated clearly, and you tell us that there's a change in rules. And a lot of the times where I look back over different jobs that I've had, typically I've left those organisations because of poor leadership, because they failed in those areas. Um, so I like Malcolm Gladwell books. I find them an easy read, and a really, if you're not a voracious reader, and which is probably I fit into that category. There's a nice simple book that my mum gave me 20 years ago called "Who Moved My Cheese," and it's such a short, easy, simple book to read. It's you'll read it in an hour, in a night, but it's all about change and dealing with change. And once a year, I'll dig that book up and read it, and it just keeps me thinking about, am I happy doing what I'm doing, or do I need to change, look at something different. So they're kind of three recommendations for different audiences, I suppose.
No, it's fantastic. I'm a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell as well. In fact, I've got his Outliers book currently on Audible. I'm just going through. I've got about 5 to 10 books on Audible that, like you just mentioned with your Who Moved My Cheese book, annually pull that one out. There's about 5 to 10 on Audible that I just, as I'm driving in the car, I just listen to, and it's interesting. I think I've listened to his book Outliers 3 or 4 times now in the car, but I'm still picking things up. I think it's like a 7-hour book. I've got it on a little bit of a fast, it's like 1.5 times, maybe not 1.5 times, but it's interesting how you can read something every year, and I'm sure you pick up a nugget or two from, a book that you read annually. I'm the same way when it comes to leadership and pain science books and that sort of thing, and performance books, where I have to read it and reread it and study it and digest it. So yeah, those are 3 like well-rounded books. I just want to clarify, that's Craig Bellamy from Australia, right? Not Craig Bellamy from Wales, right? A former Liverpool player. And yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Just
because
want to clarify.
you're a very keen Liverpool fan, if I remember correctly, right?
Very keen. Yeah, I didn't cry. I don't say this as a badge of honor. I didn't cry when my wife and I got married. I was actually never more certain about a decision I've made in my life. So I was like, why would I cry about this, And then never cried at the birth of our 4 children. But my wife just gave me a Liverpool jersey for my birthday, and I started crying. Unapologetically just started crying. And you know what? It was because I knew she loved me. She knows I love Liverpool. It touched on so many different levels for me that and I was thinking about, I think I was just that happy. I was so happy I started crying. And
That's
I'm
great.
not ashamed to say it. I think as you age, your heart either gets harder or softer. Mine's definitely getting softer. And it was
That's
something that
great.
meant a lot to me. And I think she knew that, and so it's on film somewhere. She's got me on film crying.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
yeah,
deep down, she sounds like a really nice person, but deep down, maybe she's got this evil streak, wicked streak, that she just likes to make people cry. I mean, have you ever
there's
have you ever
that.
considered that?
I have not considered that. She we could have her own episode on just our wives, I'm sure. But it's truly like, I can't speak highly enough of my wife, because she is, I don't know, she's just an amazing spouse, amazing person, and she's definitely loyal, and just she's, I don't know, she just is very intentional with who she is as a person, and that means a lot to me, and it's a standard that I'm trying to match as her husband.
Yeah,
She's
yeah.
she
That's
chooses her words very carefully as a parent, and I'm constantly like looking at her like, wow, that was really good, I got to write that down, what you just said. I would not have said it at all what you just said, but that just makes complete sense. So as a parent, I actually look to my wife as the example, and I'm constantly learning from. So but yeah,
you should get her on the show. You should get her on the show, and
whew,
we could all learn some things.
holy cow. Yeah, it's funny. Speaking of books and parenting and stuff, which I had no idea we would kind of go down this rabbit trail on this episode, but I'm fine with it. Um, I will read parenting books, kind of like there's a good parenting book called Boundaries. I mean, it applies to parenting. It's also for employees and just everything, but it's by I think it's by a couple of authors, but one of them is Henry Cloud. And I'll like read a paragraph to her out loud. I'm like, do you realize you just did this like yesterday? Like I'm reading this in a book, but I watched you do this exact thing that these guys are saying you should do in the book. I'm like, when are you
Wow.
going to write your book, Mary? You know, you should write these things. She's like, oh no, I can't do that. But I do have to say that, you know, it's fun to parent and to live life with my spouse, obviously. And it sounds like you have a great partnership and a teammate in your wife. But just to kind of close out, because I'm sure we could talk about our lives and we can connect more when you come to Chicago here next year. But for those that would like to learn more about you, we'll make sure we include your website and your social media handles and your email, all of that stuff in the show notes. But where would you? I mean, I know you're on Twitter and active on Facebook. Where would you say the best platform to connect with you would be on?
Look, I'm a little bit old school, so drop me an email is probably send me an email is probably the best way to get a hold of me. But if you message me on any of those platforms, I do my best to get back in touch as soon as possible. But you know, if you're in the States and you're interested in doing the face-to-face live workshop, you know, a lot of content, but a lot of practical stuff. Chicago's where it's going to be at, and that's where my head's at the moment. I'm focusing on the world being under control. Hopefully that's the case, and Chicago's going to be. We're gonna launch with a massive party there, and
That's right. That's right.
the workshop will be there. We'll do some live online workshops, so people can catch up, and you know, but feel free to get in touch on any of those platforms, email or social media, and I'll respond. I'll get back in touch. Maybe not straight away, but I'll do my best to get back in touch as soon as possible.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Tim, I just want to thank you for coming on the podcast here. We'll make sure that we get all the books, the links, all the information that we've talked about in the show notes, including your social media, website, email, all that stuff. Any closing remarks for us?
Just keep doing what you're doing, Alex. It's you know, I really like the way you go about your business, and you know, you're probably a little bit harsh on yourself with your work-life balance, but you know, I'm a bit of an observer of things as well. So you know, I observed the way you interacted with people when I was there in Chicago, and I think you've got the balance down pretty well. So just keep doing what you're doing.
You're very kind, Tim. I really do appreciate you saying that. I really do. And I'm excited for round 2 with you here in Chicagoland. So we
Same.
sold out last time. And so for those of you that are interested, I highly encourage you to take advantage of Tim's offer to come to Chicago next year. We'll have some links for the class when those dates are finalized and put up on the website and everything. Tim, thank you so much for coming out, taking time aside from all your research, all your paperwork, all your coursework that you're working on. It's really, really important stuff. And thank you for what you do.
Thanks, Alex.
I can't thank you enough. That's all
My
I've
pleasure.
got for this episode of the Clinical Leadership Podcast, sponsored by Midwest Rehabilitation Institute. And until next time, folks, thanks for listening.